people have always looked at me like that. And people, probably always thought I was crazy, and people talk shit about me in multiple contexts all the time. And like, at the end of the day, like, they're not the ones that have to wake up and be me every day. I'm the only person in the entire world that wakes up every single morning and looks me in the mirror. Like, I'm the only person that has to do that. So like, I want to make sure that I'm happy with the person I'm looking back in the mirror at. And I knew that I wouldn't be happy if I didn't try to at least go for these big goals and dreams that I had. Like, it just doesn't make sense to me not to. The worst case scenario, people give way too much weight to the worst case scenario because culture tells them that it's horrible. It's really not horrible. Like, in life, we only have a few basic necessities. We want to be loved and accepted and felt and heard, right? Like, things like that. But in terms of materialistic things, like, we need food, we need water, we need shelter, and we need some clothes. Like, that's not that expensive if you're willing to bite the bullet and be disciplined for a while.
What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to My Social Life. This is the podcast where you can hear the life stories behind the people on social media. I'm your host, Jacob Kelly. As always, today's podcast is powered by TruthFan. Before we get into today's conversation with Travis Chappell, there's a couple things that we need to go over first. If you enjoyed today's podcast, be sure to leave us a positive rating and review. Share this episode with a friend and subscribe to the show. But a brand new interviews every single Monday, and a brand new takeaways episode is an audio exclusive where I sit down and break down the most recent podcast episode of the week every single Thursday. And now, without further ado, I'm very excited to present to you my conversation with Travis Chappell. What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to My Social Life. I'm your host, Jacob Kelly. As always, today's podcast is powered by TruthFan. Today on the show, we are joined by Travis Chappell. Travis is the host of a top 15 business podcast, Build Your Network, and he is on a mission to help 1 million people cultivate genuine relationships the right way. And I'm very excited to have him here on the podcast today. Travis, welcome to the show.
What's up, Jacob? Thanks so much for having me, man.
I'm excited to have you here. Thank you for taking the time. Where I want to start, I want to go all the way back to the beginning. It's where I like to start every single podcast. And from my understanding, you grew up in a religious community, right?
Yeah, that's one way to say it. I can't bring myself to call it a cult because I don't think it was, but a bubble is the word that I usually use to describe kind of what it felt like, because I graduated kindergarten on the same campus that I graduated high school and college on. Campus, like the same campus, not just the same church or whatever. Like, so the place that I went to church on Sundays, we'd had Sunday morning, Sunday night, and Wednesday night services. That was the same campus that I went to school on Monday through Friday. And then we had soul winning on Saturdays. So almost literally every day of my life from the time that I was, 3 till the time that I was 21 was lived on this one campus. My friends, my authority figures, my youth pastors were my teachers were my church leaders. Everything was all kind of commingled and the same. And it was very much a bubble.
Yeah. And that was Independent Fundamental Baptist, right?
Correct. Yep. The IFB. Yep.
IFB. And you mentioned soul winning Saturdays there, and I'm kind of curious about that. So from my understanding, what that was kind of going door to door and trying to, I don't know if convert is the right word, but get people to join the church, right?
Yeah, essentially. Yeah. It's basically like door to door sales. We would just go out and we would get like a map and a bunch of church tracts or flyers and go door to door and invite people to come to church on Sunday, essentially.
And just kind of knowing how your story kind of eventually continued with you doing door-to-door sales later, was there kind of a natural ability for door-to-door sales back then?
Yeah, it's funny because you would think that would be the case, but I don't think that it necessarily directly translated because a lot of my friends, grew up the same way that I did, and ironically, a lot of them worked for the same company that I worked for in college, and they just didn't do as well with it. So I think that it was got me used to the idea. Like, I wasn't like packed of and full of anxiety when I started knocking doors because I was used to knocking on doors. But beyond that, I don't think there was much to it beyond that, or else I feel like a lot of my friends would have seen the same success that I saw on door to door, and that just wasn't the case.
Yeah, and a lot of your friends, you all worked for the same door-to-door company because they realized with all of you graduating from this same campus that a lot of you weren't going to be distracted by partying or anything like that, right? And to be really focused to the job, and that's why a lot of you got jobs at that same company.
Yeah, 100%, man. I mean, that's why the door-to-door mecca of the world is in Utah, in Provo, you know what I mean? Because they recruit directly out of BYU and all these Mormon campuses because they're all young, clean-cut, professional kids that, on the weekends, instead of trying to go out to a club or get drunk or any of that stuff, they're just looking for something to do, and they wanna go make money. So they're like the perfect places to go recruit kids out of. And our college, there was less than 1,000 students on the campus, so it's no BYU, but the culture was very similar. A bunch of young, clean cut, hardworking kids that are willing to put in hours that other people weren't willing to do. And so, yeah, they kind of, one door to door company in particular just kind of realized it, and it was like a honeypot of good reps for them, and they were able to recruit directly out of the college, became the number one market in the entire company.
Wow. And so because you ended up moving off of the campus right around when you're 21, 22, was that because of the door-to-door job, or did everyone else kind of stay on campus and you were the only one to leave?
So I graduated college, basically is what happened, and then left for the first time. So not everybody at the college grew up at the church, right? So like I was one of they were called Lancaster kids, the kids that grew up in Lancaster. So I happened to grow up at that whole church and community and stuff, but the college was full of kids from all over the world that in the IFB movement who would send kids to the college. So out of the less than 1,000 students that were there was probably less than 50 of us that were Lancaster kids. But by the time that I graduated, I was quote unquote placed in ministry because that's like the number one metric. If you're talking KPIs, like that's like their number one metric is how many students can we place in full time Christian ministry after graduation. And so they really pushed hard for you to be placed before you graduated. And there was one pastor that I resonated with because he told me when we met and had our interview. All the other ones depressed me, to be honest with you. They were all just like crappy opportunities in crappy parts of the country doing crap work. And I was just like really getting in my head. I was just like, man, this sounds horrible. What have I done? And so this one pastor basically was like, look, we don't care how you get out here, what you do, or what you want to do. We just want you to come out. So if you want something full time, we have a full time position available for you. If you want something part time, we have a part time position available for you. If you want to just come out and go to the church and work doing sales thing like you're doing right now, great. Whatever it is, we just want you here, essentially. And that was really one of the first times that I really resonated with what somebody was telling me. So I took him up on the part time job before I moved out there, just so that I could tell everybody at the college, because you get asked all the time, where you're going or what you're going to be doing after college. So I would just tell everybody, oh, I'm going up to serve at X, whatever church with pastor, whatever. And so it got people off my back, and I didn't have to answer those questions anymore. But what ended up happening is when we moved out moved up to Fresno from Lancaster, so Southern California to Central California, which is where this church was, we bought our first house. And I could not qualify for the home loan at 100% commission because I hadn't been doing it long enough for the banks to accept it as income. So I did an internal transfer in the company to get a salaried position at the company. And it was the only time in my life that I've ever worked a 9 to 5. And it lasted for about 5 weeks while we were in escrow. But when we first moved, because I was working at that job, they made me work on Sundays. And so I couldn't do the part-time job that I said I was going to do when we first moved there because I had to work Sundays for this other job while I was like 9 to 5 style salary, and so it took me all of that 4 or 5 weeks to figure out that I didn't want to do it, because by the time we closed escrow, I quit my job like the day after we closed escrow to get back into 100% commission, things that I couldn't stand people telling me what to do. And it freed up my Sundays again, and I was able to go work part time. But by that 4 weeks was all I needed to understand that, like, you know what, I don't think ministry is for me.
Was that a tough decision to come to still? Because from my understanding, like growing up and on the campus, like you thought from pretty much like day one of birth, you were going to be a minister when you graduated college. So was that like a really hard thing for you to wrestle with?
Oh, it took me like a year and a half, man, like to get to that type of decision. And that's why it took me only that 4 weeks to come to the full conclusion, because it was the first time in my life. You have to think like the time that we started going to that church when I was 3, I was enrolled in kindergarten when I was 5. And then like, that was my life. So literally I dedicated myself to full-time Christian ministry when I was 12. You know what I mean? So like we didn't have career counselors. There were no other options. They didn't present the ability to be an engineer or an architect or a business person. They didn't present anything except for ministry or not ministry. If you check the ministry box, they didn't even tell you about any other colleges that existed that could be potentially the college you go to. They just hand you an application for the college that's on the same campus, and then if it's not ministry, they're like, good luck. And that's why all the people that didn't go into ministry, they usually end up at the local junior college taking classes and working some dead end job or in the military because they don't present any other options. So that was the only option that I knew. And that was what I was planning on doing with the rest of my life. So it was a really difficult decision to come to that. But by the time that I had lived in Fresno for 4 weeks, the first time in my life that I'd ever been away from all the influences of growing up, it was enough for me to make the decision to get to know myself enough to know that like this isn't going to work out for me. I need to pursue something different.
Where do you think, kind of with that in mind, with the fact that they're very much all in on this one track of being a minister, you were still, from my understanding, very entrepreneurial growing up, right? Like you used to sell stuff at school, you had your own landscaping company. So where does these entrepreneurial tendencies come from? If like it wasn't nurtured at you, it just kind of happened naturally, from my understanding.
Yeah, I don't really know, man. It's a good question because like, my dad was always entrepreneurial. He was a real estate agent, like he grew up with nothing and it grew up in the same area that I did. And when he was growing up, it was a lot more desolate and crappy than when I was there. And it still is that way. And he made something of himself out of nothing. And so I think that kind of rubbed off on me too. But my sister isn't really the same way that I am entrepreneurially, so I know that that's not the only thing. I feel like it's kind of a combination of like, seeing, my dad always tried to make sure that I knew that it was possible for me. But beyond that, I think it was just kind of naturally something inside of me. Like I always liked having money. I always wanted to, I always liked the freedom that came along with having money. Like the fact that like, I don't have to depend on my parents to buy this video game for me or to buy this iPhone, right? Like I can buy it myself because I earned the money to go buy it. And I thought that was just always something that appealed to me. And I just knew, I figured like when I was in ministry, I would just always do something on the side to make a little bit extra cash or something like that. You know what I mean? I figured that's what would be what it would translate to. But it was definitely not encouraged by any church leaders or anything like that. That's for sure. But my parents did. My parents were, always kind of just encouraging about whatever I was trying to do.
What is one of those first things you can remember that you saved up for and bought with your own money?
One of the bigger things was probably my first iPhone, because when I was in high school is when the original iPhones came out. And so it was super cool back then to like pre iPhone. It was really cool. It was baller to have an iPod Touch. Like pre iPod Touch, it was baller to have like an iPod video. Like a video iPod. And so by the time my senior year came around, I ended up buying myself. I think I think it was iPhone, and then it was like iPhone 3G and 3GS. So I bought the 3GS on my with my own money that I saved up. It was like 400 or 500 bucks or something like that, and I felt like a baller when I bought that. That's for sure.
Yeah, no, 100%. And so you mentioned that back to door-to-door sales, you went back to 100% commission. And I feel like that's a decision most people wouldn't make, right? And you said it was because you didn't like being told what to do. Was that the entire motivating factor behind that decision? Was because you knew you had the talent to map to doing 100% commission sales and you could make way more?
Yeah, it was both. It never made sense to me to do salaried sales if 100% commission was on the table because 100% commission you can make a lot more money. I find that all the salespeople that are always worried about salaries are not as strong salespeople. Like they bottom line. Any industry, show me like the person that's like, oh, I need a salary, I need a salary. Like, well, you're probably not going to do super great with this then. You know what I mean? And if you like absolutely need that to make it work, then I might go just try to find somebody else. Because like true, like really good salespeople, man, like they like the 100% commission world because like to me, I liked seeing a disparity between my income and the bottom 20% in the company's income. And if you're in a salaried position, that income varies at a smaller percentage than if you're at 100% commission. There were guys in the office that would make 20 grand a year the same year that I was making 100 plus. You know what I mean? Like, whereas if you're in a salary position, bottom tier guys are making 50, 60, top tier guys are making, 120. But like the difference is that like the margin that the company has to pay the reps is the same. Does that make sense? So like all the high performers are doing in those other types of salary position type companies are making up for the lack of production from the people who aren't producing as much, which didn't make as much sense to me as a sales rep, because I was like, if I'm working my ass off and I'm going to like put this much work in, I want to get compensated for it. So that was definitely a factor, but the main factor was autonomy over my time. I've always just never liked having to report to somebody. And in those corporate environments, a lot of times you have to report to somebody that you don't respect, or somebody that you can outsell or even outmanage. And like, I never vibed with that. I never liked that.
And so what was it about you that allowed you to separate yourself from that bottom 20%? Why was there such a big margin?
I don't know, man. That's a good question. That a lot of that comes down to human social psychology, I think, because um, I, I I didn't outwork everybody. That wasn't it. A lot of people, that's the answer. Yeah, my first year doing full time door to door, I there was like 30 reps in the office, and I became the second highest paid rep in the office my first year. The only guy that beat me worked twice as many hours as I did. Like I was working 20, 25 hours a week. I would work in the afternoon when people were home. So I'd go out from like, based on if it was summer or winter, it would be like 1 o'clock to 5 o'clock or 4 o'clock to 8 o'clock. Like I would go out for 3 or 4, like 4 or 5 hours a day, go get a couple deals, come home. This the only guy that beat me would go out in the mornings and go business to business and sell, and then would go out in the afternoons and go door to door, like customers, consumers, and sell. And so he was literally putting twice the amount of effort that I was putting in, and he only made like 15% more than I did. And so I don't think it was necessarily hard work. I think it was just teachability, coachability, like the proximity. I would always put myself in proximity to the top producers and learn from them. And then I would implement what I learned from them. I didn't have to reinvent the wheel. I would let my personality come through, but I wasn't always trying to reinvent the wheel and make stuff up. And, I didn't whine and complain about deals that I lost. I just learned from them and kept going and put in the amount of work that was necessary to get to the goals that I had. And I think that proximity thing was a really big deal. Learning from the people that were doing it at a higher level was certainly helpful as well.
But despite working like 20, 25 hours a week, pulling six figures, which I think for a lot of people would be an ideal situation, you realized pretty quickly that you didn't want to do door to door sales forever, right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I appreciate you, by the way, for doing the research before we're having this conversation. It definitely shows. Um, yeah, that was exactly right. It seemed like an ideal situation for most 22-year-olds to pull a six-figure income working 20 hours a week. It seems like pretty ideal. But I learned pretty quickly that six figures is not a lot of money. You know what I mean? Like if you want to start doing stuff that you want to do, you start traveling a little bit, you start spending a little bit of money here, there. It's like, man, six figures is not that much money. And I knew that I didn't want to be knocking on doors, so it was kind of counterintuitive, because at the end of that year, when I reached the goals that I wanted to reach, I was basically done, because I knew that I was already like scraping up against the ceiling where I was in the opportunity that I had. And I knew if I doubled my work ethic and I put in more hours and recruited more guys, I could probably get up to 150, maybe $200,000 a year. But that would still be the limit. Anything beyond that would be really, really difficult to do. And, if it's 10 years later, maybe I have a bunch of referral business, I could get to 250,000, but like that, it just wasn't what I wanted to be doing. And when I looked at 32-year-old Travis, I didn't want to be knocking doors anymore. And so, yeah, I just quit. I quit. I stopped doing it. That's the crappy thing about a 100% commission thing, is that you can't half-ass it and get any decent results. If you have a salary, you can just show up to work, collect a paycheck, do the bare minimum, and figure out what you're going to do next. 100% commission, you can't just show up to work and do the bare minimum. You got to like be all in and be attacking your sales numbers and stuff. And I wasn't at that point anymore. So I stopped and started doing some personal development for the first time in my life, reading some books, listening to audiobooks. And that's when I discovered podcasting for the first time.
Yeah. And then with that, podcasting ultimately led you to John Lee Dumas, which led to you going to his mastermind, right? And that was one of the big steps you took in terms of your personal development.
That was huge, man. Yeah, it was huge. I had never invested in myself at that type of a level. Prior to that, it was like audiobook, book, $25, $18. And then all of a sudden I'm looking at a weekend mastermind, 3-day mastermind for $6,500 in Puerto Rico. So I got to pay for my flights and like all the other stuff, food, all these other things. This is $8,000 weekend. You know what I mean? I was just like, whoa, is this something that people do? And I would talk to a few of my friends and they were obviously scoffing at it and, like being like, well, you could spend that, you could spend that on so many other things. Why would you do that? And blah, blah, blah. And, but I ended up taking the plunge and it was one of the best decisions that I ever made in my life up to that point. And really got me into the, investments in yourself will always pay off type of mentality. And I started aggressively making continuous investments and up leveling myself, my life, my knowledge, my network, and all of the above.
Why is the reason that it was one of the most important financial decisions you made up to that point? Because like this is coming from someone who's never attended a mastermind. So like I see that $6,500 figure and I can't wrap my head around that. So what made the exchange of value $6,500? What were you getting in return that made it so worth it?
Yeah, I think it just proved that it was possible for me to be able to get in touch with people that most people don't get in touch with. Somebody like at the time, John Lee Dumas. The dude gets 1 million plus downloads a month on his podcast. People are reaching out to him all the time. There's a lot of people that try to get in and learn from him, and he has a course, and I saw that, and I was like, I could do that. It's only $1,000. It's $97 a month. I can do that for sure. But then I was just like, but that's what everybody else does. And I don't want to be everybody else. I want to be better. I want to be the top 1%. I want to like get in and do this really, really well. I don't want to half-ass it. And like I said, going back, like the best way that I knew how to do that was proximity to people who were doing it at the highest level. And JLD was doing it at the highest level, and I wanted proximity to him, and I wanted to get to know him, have a relationship with him, where I could get some advice and learn from him, and maybe get some connections every now and again. Like I started placing a really high value on the relationships that I had inside of the space that I wanted to be influential in.
And not only was the proximity to JLD important, but you tried to separate yourself even at that mastermind, right? From my understanding, you bought a drone to try and take some aerial photos of his house, but crashed it before you got the chance to do so.
Oh yeah, yeah. So when I first made the investment, it was like my immediate reaction was I better get my money back. You know what I mean? Like they better show up and deliver value like crazy. And my immediate taker brain started kicking in, and then I was just like, no, 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 no. If I'm going to go out to this thing, I need to approach it as a giver. I need to come here, figure out a way to differentiate myself even from the 6 people that are going to be out here, and build a real relationship, with this guy. And so I was like, well, at that time I had a background in photography. I did some photography in college and shot a few weddings and things like that to make extra money. And so I brought out my camera. I bought a drone. I was like, man, I'll take some good footage of this, mastermind they're doing. That way, next time they do it, they'll have some like really good professional style footage. This will be a really cool value add. And then, yeah, I get there. The first night I throw the drone up. It's only like the second time I've ever flown it, because my house at the time in Lancaster was in like restricted airspace because there was a Northrop plant like 2 miles from my house. So like, we literally couldn't fly it. So I get there, throw it up the first night, and beautiful sunset, Puerto Rico, got beautiful scenes of the beach. I'm coming back to land it. I thought the landing was a lot more automated than it turned out to be. I go to land it on this like really tiny condo roof space. And basically one of the propellers caught a plant, and then like the plant, when it got caught on the propeller, like threw the drone into the wall next to it, and 2 of the propellers broke, and it only came with 1 replacement propeller. So yeah, I was essentially effed at that point, because the $1,200 investment that I had made on top of the whole weekend investment that I had made literally crashed in front of my eyes, and along with it the opportunity to add value and stick out and stand out a little bit. So I had to kind of keep my eyes peeled for the rest of the weekend to see if there's another way I could add value, which ended up working out okay. So
What was that other way you ended up finding? What's the other way you added value?
yeah, he basically what ended up happening is, throughout the weekend, everybody got to know that I was a door to door sales guy. I'd done door to door sales for a long time. So I stopped doing door to door to like get into personal development stuff. But after doing that for a few months, I still got to make money. I still got to pay the bills. And so a buddy of mine started selling water purifiers door to door, and the margins were healthy. And so I basically was just doing that. So I would do that like 20, 25 hours a week, and then I would do podcasting 20, 25 hours a week, and that was how I was making money. And so he learned that I had a bunch of experience in sales. He was going to be speaking at a conference, had a booth where he was going to be selling journals that he had just came out with. And And he was like, "Hey, would you mind coming by the booth? I have like this guy that volunteered to work the booth, but he's never done sales before. Can you just like give him a few different, closing lines and ideas for him to sell at this trade show? Because when I was doing door to door, we would also do home shows and different trade shows and stuff. And so I had a lot of experience in those things. And so I basically was just like, hey, instead of just giving him a couple minutes of advice, I'll just work the booth for you. Like I'll sell at the booth for you, which was obviously a um in terms of my actual time and what I got back from it was a bad use of time. Like if I worked a 3-day home show with the water purifiers that I was selling, I could pull 5 figures in a weekend. You know what I mean? But instead of doing that, I'm volunteering 3 full days, like 3 full 8-hour days at a trade show, hawking journals for $30 a piece, making $0 in commission, paying for my own hotel room to be there just for proximity to somebody who is doing what I wanted to be doing at the highest level. And I think people are always afraid to reinvent themselves, man. Like people get this thing in their head where like they've done well in one space. And when they move over to the other space, they expect everybody to like bring them in with open arms and be like, hey, we worship you because you're awesome at this other thing. It's like, it doesn't matter, man. Like you're starting over. So you got to start over and have the humility to start over and be like, hey, look, I may have, had some successes over here, but I have no idea what the hell I'm doing over here. So I need some help. You know what I mean? I feel like a lot of people's egos get in the way of them doing that, and that just wasn't me. I was just like, I'll do whatever I can. All I want is proximity to power. All I want is proximity to the people who've been doing this at the highest level for a long time, so that I can learn and build relationships with those people. And then at that event, he ended up inviting me out to another event that he was keynoting at. I got to work another event with him. He introduced me to the event organizer at that event who was running a high level mastermind. I ended up joining that mastermind, which led me to a different mastermind and made introductions for me across the entire industry. Like this was a huge, pivotal moment for me.
How do you switch from that? You mentioned when you first signed up for JLD's mastermind, you kind of had that taker's mindset. How do you switch from that to the giver's mindset? How is that like just something you have to be conscious of, or what do you do to switch that?
Yeah, you just got to be conscious of it. A lot of people don't realize that they're doing it, and they place too much short-term value on maybe some knowledge. So like that weekend, is like, did I get some great knowledge information? Yeah, sure. But is that what made it worth the money? Definitely not. It's definitely the relationships that made it worth the money. And people have way too much of a short-term mind when they think about those things. And then they'll go out, spend the money, they'll come back and be like, hey, I didn't make that back in the next 30 days. So it was a waste of money, and screw that guy for charging me that much. What a waste of time. He's a scam artist, all this other bullshit. And it's just like, no, you're just looking at it wrong. You're looking at it incorrectly. You need to reframe it as like, how can I continue to add value, give to people, show up day after day for a multitude of years, and like it's always going to come back good on you. So to me, it was just a mindset shift. If you haven't read the book Give and Take, I highly recommend it. To me, it helps me. It helps me. Helps me make sense of my decisions from a logical standpoint if I can have research and data to back up why I'm making those decisions. And if you read Give and Take, you'll find that being a giver always beats being a taker, or being a matcher even. And so it was easy for me to kind of look at what I was doing and be like, this is not going to work out for me if I come into the situation with this mentality and this mindset. And so I need to switch it up.
And while we're on the topic of masterminds, I have to ask about Dan Fleischman's mastermind because I believe you attended that. It's a six-figure mastermind, right? $100,000 to attend.
Yes, sir. Yeah. I mean, there's always levels. You know what I mean? The first one I did was $6,500, and then I did one for 15K, and rejoined that one well once or twice after that, and then yeah, doing now this one, the 100 million mastermind with Dan Fleischman and Joel Marion that run it together. And yeah, it's $100,000 to get into that mastermind, but man, the relationships have been out of this world. I've made some amazing connections. We've done business, done deals with a lot of people that are in the group, and it's been overall a really great experience.
That's awesome. And again, it's all about the follow up. It's not just about that one weekend. It's about what you do after that weekend that makes that $100,000 investment worth it.
Yeah. Oh yeah. And not even after that weekend. It's like after that year. What are you gonna do? What are you gonna do with those relationships 3 years from now, 4 years from that? Like that's why I join these types of groups, man. It's not even just for the immediate return or what happens in the next 3 to 6 months. It's like, look, if we're building relationships with people that are all really high level, relationships take time. It's like dating and marriage. You don't want to date somebody for 3 weeks and then get married. You know what I mean? Like but what happens over the course of 5 years, 10 years can be huge. And so when you look at some of these groups with all these people that you're meeting, building relationships with, you're staying in contact with them, you're following up, you're building rapport with each other, you're doing a little deal here, a little deal there. Who knows? Maybe 5 years from now, I partner with somebody from that group on a $300 million business that we build together. You know what I mean? Like the possibilities are literally infinite in scope if you get in with the right mentality, add with or lead with value, and then build relationships for the long term. There's a lot of positive things to be said about groups like that. So, man, I don't even know, probably over 250K now that I've invested into masterminds, events, hotels, flights, coaches, you name it, just trying to learn and accelerate the growth process.
As a podcast host, I'm sure you know when your guest is talking, you're thinking to yourself, "This is definitely going to be a clip." That was one of those moments right there where you're talking. I know that's definitely going to be a social clip when this episode comes out. But back to your podcast now. JLD was your third guest, right? So had you started your show before that mastermind, or did it happen after the JLD mastermind?
Yeah, I was kind of getting some coaching from a guy named Jeff that actually JLD introed me to. And that mastermind was in May and I launched in August. So it was like 2 or 3 months after that mastermind that I launched my show. But I probably had 32, 33 interviews already done before I launched.
That's smart. Yeah, that runway. But you had the idea to start a podcast back in September of 2016, right? So you kind of waited a year to launch it.
Yep. Regretfully. Yeah. I was just, imposter syndrome, analysis paralysis, too many ideas, directions, didn't know how to really get it done, kept postponing it, putting it off. Um, I ended up launching 11 months after I originally knew that I wanted to launch a show. So, you live and learn, I guess, but it also taught me to not do that in the future. If I feel like I want to do something, and I think that it actually has legs and that it's the direction that I want to be heading in, then I'd take action on it.
Mhm. And so, how did you ultimately decide on your niche? Because I know you originally wanted to do a sales podcast, right? But then you decided that you did some research and you realized that actually networking would be a better niche for you. How did you come to that decision? What research did you put in to figure that out?
Yeah, it was as simple as Googling or going to Apple Podcasts and searching for sales. And there was just dozens of podcasts that came up. And I was just like, I don't know. I didn't know much about the world, but I knew that you needed to find a niche if you had any opportunity of being heard. And especially at the time, I was a 24-year-old door-to-door sales guy. There's a ton of other really well-known sales trainers that had huge podcasts. And not to say that it's impossible, it just would have been a lot more difficult. And so I was like, what's another thing that I can talk about? And like I was talking about before, the other thing that I would attribute my sales ability to was always proximity to people who were doing it a lot better than I was doing it and learning from them. And that to me was networking, getting around people who had been doing it on such a high level. And so I searched iTunes for networking and saw that there were no podcasts that existed that only talked about that topic. And I saw that as like a big blue ocean opportunity for me. And then figured, this is a good topic for me to talk about because I'll learn how to network better. And I needed to build my own network because I was essentially starting from scratch after I left that bubble world that I kind of grew up in. I didn't know any, I never met a millionaire, let alone had a personal relationship with one. And I'm talking like a $1 million millionaire, not like 9-figure billionaire or 10 or 8-figure even, like anybody that made decent money. Like I'd never known anybody like that. So it was a message that meant a lot to me and also allowed me to kind of carve out my own space within that world.
The person listening to this is probably thinking like that's such an easy way to research whether like to find your niche, but most people don't even do that. You know what I mean? So it's just a small little action that most people won't do. And it's those small actions over time that help make the difference. And you, from my understanding too, that with your show, you almost quit early on, right?
Yeah, I mean, there's several times that I would thought about quitting. Definitely when I was like a year in, thought about quitting. At that point, I had some big guests on my show that even shared the episodes that I did with them. It just didn't seem like I was making any headway. Didn't seem like I was making any progress. It was crickets every time I launched an episode. I was still getting 2, 3, 400 downloads an episode, and I thought it would be so much better by then. And um, is discouraging, man. I was doing 3 interviews a week at that time, so it was like really high output and not getting a ton of results back on it. But Man, there were so many times like that where I was just like, what am I doing? I'm working so hard on this. And it was so hard to see what the future looked like with it because I knew that if I sold stuff, I knew the direct effect that that had on my bank account. But podcasting was never that way. It was always just like a just keep doing it. Trust the process. Stay consistent. Add more value. Get better guests. Put more quality content out. Like it was always just a matter of let's just keep doing it.
When did the tide start to turn?
A few months after that, I started monetizing around month. I went full time month 13. And so I started monetizing some stuff, started selling some stuff, started my first kind of mastermind group, started doing a little bit of podcast coaching and things like that, moved online full time at that period. And so, within that year, there was a fair amount of pushing forward, making some progress, doing it enough to where I was like, oh, I can actually make a little bit of money doing this. Things like that that were signs that I was at least headed in the right direction, even though I didn't know exactly how what it was going to look like or how I was going to make it work long term or where I would end up. I just there was enough signs to be like, all right, this is at least good enough and fun enough for me to be able to continue putting work into it.
The first time you monetized was 6 months in, right? It was a mastermind, but you didn't really make any money on it, right?
Yeah, yeah, it was right about 6 months in, and I did like literally four, man, like five or six people in the mastermind, and it was super cheap. It was like $900 for 3 months or $1,000 for 3 months or something like that. And there was like five of us. And I included a ticket to a conference that was $800 in the full $1,000 bucks. So like literally, bro, I was making nothing on it. I probably lost money. I definitely lost time. But it proved that people were willing to pay for what I had to offer. And that was a big deal to me. And yeah, so that led to doing another group and then continuing going along that line.
So bring me back to that day you're sitting in the car outside a restaurant about to meet some buddies who are in town for a wedding and that PayPal hits your phone.
Yeah, yeah, that was really the first time that I ever made money online, and it was a guy that had listened to my podcast, and I think we hopped on a call at the time. I was doing like free phone calls for anybody that would jump on a phone call with me, and we ended up talking to this guy. He liked my show, liked my style, whatever, and I told him that I was thinking about putting together a networking course for like $300 or something like that, 297 or something. Maybe it was 197, but anyway, I told him about it, and then by the time we had hung up the phone, he was like, "Check your phone," and I checked it, and he had sent me money for the course before I even built it, and it was the first dollar that I ever made online, and it was like, "Holy shit, people like this dude's actually paying me for some knowledge that I might have. I haven't even created it yet, but he likes me enough because he's listened to my podcast enough that he's willing to pay for it without me even creating it because he knows it's gonna be quality, whatever it is." And that was a huge green light moment for me. I ended up not doing the course. We ended up doing the mastermind. And I called that same guy back and was like, "Hey, do you want your money back? I'm not doing the course anymore." And instead of asking for his money back, he just upgraded to the mastermind and sent me another $700. And so he was one of the first people in that group.
That's awesome. And is there kind of around that when you're monetizing online for the first time? You talked about imposter syndrome kind of in that first year. Is there also some imposter syndrome when you're monetizing for the first time? Like, do I know enough to be charging people this amount for whatever
100%.
it is?
That's why I didn't do the course. That's why I did the mastermind. Like my mastermind pitch was basically, "Hey, since I've been in a bunch of these groups, I've made some good relationships with really high quality entrepreneurs, and I'm going to bring them in to do Q&As." Like my whole mastermind pitch was about the people that I knew, not about me at all. And it remained that way, honestly, for a long time. So, the thing about those types of groups is like you just have to figure out how to add value. You have to figure out how to add value and build the value up in that group. And that doesn't necessarily mean you have to be the person who's providing all the content or providing all the knowledge or the skill sets. Like it might be a combination. It might be, hey, we do some coaching and then we're bringing in these other people who know way more about this than I do, and they're going to be awesome and blah, blah, blah. You never know.
Mhm. And so you said it was 13 months when when you took the leap and were completely full time online.
Yep. Yep. Yeah. It was like September. No, it was like October, maybe 14 months since I launched my podcast. So like October, November of that next year after I launched.
So how do you feel that first morning you wake up where you're entirely making money just from yourself, from your brand, and you're not doing door to door sales anymore? Are you worried? Are you excited? Like, what does that first day feel like?
I was stoked to not be knocking doors anymore because I didn't want to do that for a long time. It was the first time in my life that I ever done something where I was making less money. Like we broke a lease on this like 3,700 square foot home with a pool that we had rented, and we literally moved back in. We moved in with my brother-in-law who had a 900 square foot apartment. Me and my wife and my two dogs moved into his apartment, and like we split rent. Our monthly bills were super low, and I started working on the business. I was making like, I don't know, 3, 4,000 bucks a month or something like that, which coming from being used to making over 10K a month in, pretty inconsequential work weeks just by selling a couple deals here and there, was a big adjustment to make. But I was excited to finally be doing stuff online. I didn't know exactly how I was going to shake out or how I was going to make it work, but I was excited to be in that position. And that's the cool thing about having the valuable skill set of learning how to sell, because that's what gave me the confidence to be able to pursue that path. Was just like, hey, look, even if this doesn't work out and in 6 months from now I'm broke, I know that I can go get a sales job, and make all the money back that I had in my bank account when I decided to go full time. I can make that back in 3 months. Money's renewable, man. Money's always renewable. Time is not renewable. And so I was always trying to figure out how I can condense my time, even if happens to cost me a little bit more money. I'm willing to do that.
And like you kind of, I don't know if you ever heard of Tim Ferriss's fear setting exercise, but that's kind of what you did, where you realize if it all went to zero, you could just get another sales job. And I feel like people never take the time to actually contextualize what worst case scenario looks like. You know what I mean? Like I
Yes,
think
it's a
people are just,
misunderstanding. Correct, yeah, and a really great point to bring up, and that's what I tell people all the time is like you're misunderstanding what you're misunderstanding what the worst case scenario actually looks like. And for me, understanding what that worst case scenario was, like the risk to reward just works out. You always have to look at risk versus reward. The biggest risk to me was like, look, I don't have a ton of debt. I never spent a bunch of stupid money on cars or anything like that. I didn't have credit card debt. I had really great credit. I watched my spending. I stayed disciplined and frugal in my daily finances and my personal expenses. And I put everything else that I had into growing the business, including my time. And yeah, that fundamental understanding and confidence to be able to attack what you're doing, knowing that like, hey, look, if it all goes to crap in 6 months, okay, it's gonna suck, and it's not gonna be like I'm not gonna be happy about that, right? But like worst case scenario, I can be back to the exact position that I'm in within 6 months of all of it going away. And that's a really short period of time when you look at the amount of reward that could come if it's successful. You know what I'm saying? If it's like, well, but if it's successful though, I'm going to be doing exactly what I want to do. I'm going to be making the money that I want to make the way that I want to make it, and having all the freedom in the reward was way too big to not take the risk. You know what I'm saying? And the risk was just really low when you look at what's the actual absolute worst case scenario here.
and on the note too, I feel like people don't take the time to look at the best case scenario. They just kind of latch on to that worst case scenario and just focus on that as opposed to all the positives that could potentially happen as well.
And they give too much value to what other people's opinion is of the worst case scenario. Like if you really think about it for yourself, like that's what it was for me, man. Is like people have always looked at me like that, and people probably always thought I was crazy, and people talk shit about me in multiple contexts all the time. And like at the end of the day, like they're not the ones that have to wake up and be me every day. I'm the only person in the entire world that wakes up every single morning and looks me in the mirror. Like I'm the only person that has to do that. So like I want to make sure that I'm happy with the person I'm looking back in the mirror at. And I knew that I wouldn't be happy if I didn't try to at least go for these big goals and dreams that I had. Like it just doesn't make sense to me not to. Like again, worst case scenario, man. Like I take out a couple credit cards and I rack up some debt while I save up some more money doing some sales gigs to refill my bank account, pay off my debt, and then try something else. Try something else that's going to be a big reward. You know what I mean? Like the worst case scenario, people give way too much weight to the worst case scenario because culture tells them that it's horrible. It's really not horrible. Like in life, we only have a few basic necessities. We want to be loved and accepted and felt and heard, right? Like things like that. But in terms of materialistic things, like we need food, we need water, we need shelter, and we need some clothes. Like that's not that expensive if you're willing to bite the bullet and be disciplined for a while. And so I was just always willing to do that.
Do you think another part of it too is an overvalue of money? Do you think that's another big reason for it?
Yeah, overvalue of money and a lack of confidence to go get more. That's the reason why people don't spend money, or don't invest money into things that they know they should be investing into. Like if I look at that mastermind that I joined for 100K, and I decided not to do it because I don't want to lose 100K, it's like, well, I'm just afraid that I can't go get it back if I lose it. That's the reason why I don't want to spend it. You know what I mean? Like, and obviously, I'm not saying that that's always the reason that you shouldn't, or else in that logic, you would spend money on everything that comes to your, front door. But, as long like having some discernment, some discipline, again, I'm, obviously don't mean it that way, but I do mean it in the way that, like, if you think that it's a really good fit and you know that it's something that you should be doing, you feel it in your gut that this is something that you should be doing, something that you should be taking full advantage of, and you don't do it, like it's comes from a lack of confidence in your ability to go generate that amount of money again. For somebody that makes $1 million in a year, that's why they can take bigger risks and spend 100K on something, because they're like, oh, I'll make 100K next month. You know what I mean? If somebody makes $25,000 a year, they're like, man, it takes me 4 years to make $100,000. I'm not spending 100K on anything, because like it took me 4 years to make this money, and that's not even money that I got to keep because all of it went to my bills. You know what I mean? Like that's why it always takes those people a long time to get ahead. But if you can develop the skill set to go get more money, it makes you realize how truly renewable money is. Money is the renewable asset that we have in life. Time is not. And so I was always willing to exchange money for things that allowed me to save time.
And building up that confidence is one thing. You kind of mentioned this earlier as well, but it's building up confidence and also being able to maintain that confidence even when people are talking down to you or talking negatively towards you and talking shit about your goals, right? So how did you build that up? Because like you said, you've had to deal with that. I'm sure you had to deal with it a ton when you made the decision to kind of step out of ministry and go do your own things. Like, what are some ways you developed that kind of that armor to be able to kind of shield yourself from the negative opinions of others on this journey?
The number one way to build confidence is to keep the promises that you make to yourself. That's the number one way. Um, you have to have an impeccable relationship with you if you expect other people to have a good relationship with you. It's amazing to me how people will treat themselves so differently than they will treat other people. They'll keep promises to all the people in their life, but they won't keep the promises they make to them. You know what I mean? Like if you say that, and start doing stuff like that. Start making little promises to yourself. Start making small micro commitments that you know that you can be able to keep. Every time you keep one of those promises, it's another notch. You know what I mean? It's another step toward having that confidence that you really want to have. Is small things. Hey, this week I'm gonna get up at, if you're used to get up at 8 o'clock, hey, I'm gonna get up at 6 a.m. every day this week. Cool. And if you do that, do it. I don't care what happens in life. I don't care what situation came up. Do it. Like, don't people make way too many commitments and they don't keep any of them. I make very few commitments, but when I make the commitment, I do it. That's why I'm afraid of commitment. I'm afraid to make commitments because I know that if I commit to something, I'm going to do it. So I have to evaluate that decision a lot more carefully, because I'm not just going to make commitments willy nilly and then wonder why I don't like myself when I look myself in the mirror, and wonder why other people don't want to do business with me. If you don't even like yourself, how do you expect other people to like you? If you don't even trust yourself, if you have a subconscious distrust of yourself, how do you think that comes across in a sales conversation? How do you think that comes across when you're trying to exude confidence in, while you're doing some business development for your new company? You know what I'm saying? Like, if you don't even feel like you deserve the success, if you don't feel like you've put in the work, if you don't feel like you're a trustworthy person, that's going to come across in everything that you do. Confidence matters like a lot in those scenarios. And the best way that I know how to build confidence is to continue to make promises to yourself that you actually keep, regardless of the context. Making a promise to yourself is not the same thing as like setting a goal and achieving it, by the way. It's taking the action to achieve it the best way that you know how. You know what I mean? And making goals that are similar to, like, so like in 2020, my workout goal was not like lose weight or get to the certain pounds or whatever. It was do 300 workouts in 2020. So work out every day of the year minus 65 was my goal. And when you make a goal like that and accomplish it, man, it feels so good when you get to the end of it. You know what I mean? And it gives you that notch to be like, if I truly commit to something, I will do it. And when you have that type of confidence and you can portray that type of confidence in what it is that you're doing, that'll instantly make you better at selling your ideas, selling your proposals, selling your product or your service, or whatever the case may be.
And so should these promises then kind of with the workouts, not pounds, it's workouts themselves that you're doing. So should these promises be process oriented as opposed to results oriented?
Yeah, I think a lot of times, and I'm not, and that's not to say that you shouldn't have goals. By the way, I'm just saying like if you really want to focus on building your confidence, then it's really good to focus on the actions that you can control. You can't control a lot of the output sometimes, but you can control the input. You know what I mean? Like you can control the fact that you can get up and go to the gym. Maybe your body reacts differently. Maybe you had some stress and some extra cortisol in your bloodstream that prevented you from losing the weight. But like doing the thing, that's really great for your confidence building. Is my point. So like if you're gonna make a commitment, do it. If you say you're gonna read a book this month or a book this week, do it. Even if it means that you got to stay up till 3 a.m. the night before your deadline, do it. Do it. Like that confidence is so key, man.
When did you learn the kind of the focus to make those promises to yourself that are process oriented as opposed to results oriented? Because in 2017, you also had a fitness goal, but was that one more so focused on a certain like weight number as opposed to amount of workouts? Because I saw a post on your Instagram way back in the day where it was like you set a goal to lose a ton of weight or something like that in 2017. So when did that switch come from focus on the process as opposed to the result?
Yeah, in that particular scenario, it was just because I wanted consistency. So my goal was way more in 2020 about consistency in the gym. And like COVID happened, like a perfect example. You know, we committed at the beginning of the year to do 300 workouts, me and my wife. And then a month and a half later, all gyms were closed. And it was a very good opportunity for us to be like, fuck it. We'll do it next year. You know what I mean? But like, no, we made the commitment. So we stuck to it. And we did all of our home workouts, and we were doing like the Murph challenge at our house and like running a couple miles, I was running like 4 or 5 miles a day. And like, like I was just like, hey, look, we made the commitment. We're going to do it. Even all the gyms are closed. Doesn't matter. We're still going to do it. You know what I mean? And so that back, and that's why I say like, it shouldn't prevent you from setting goals. If your goal is to lose weight, then make a weight loss goal. I'm not saying not to do those things, but I am saying like if your purpose right now is that you are lacking completely in your self-confidence, then you need to set more process-based goals that will help you to be able to have those micro achievements, those micro wins, those things that are going to boost that inner self-confidence, that inner voice of telling you that, hey, you're worth this, you're worth the success. Like you are capable and worthy of achieving these things that you've laid out for yourself. Because remember that last time when you did that and you didn't think that you were going to be able to do it? Remember when you said you weren't going to drink for an entire month and you didn't think that it was going to be possible, but then you did it? Remember that? Like you can do this too. You know what I'm saying? Like you're programming your mind to believe that the things that people have told you your whole life are impossible are actually possible. And doing those types of things is that's why we did 75 hard last year. That's why we'll do like sober October, and we'll stop certain activities for a while, or do detoxes, or do 3-day fasts, or whatever it is. It's just like if we can continue to make these little micro commitments and keep those commitments, it does wonders for your ability to believe that you can do whatever it is that you truly set your mind to. And it sounds so cliche because everybody just says it, but when you have focused a lot on training yourself to become the type of person that makes something happen when they commit to it, there's true magic in that.
Kind of reminds me, I wrote down a quote of yours here that I really liked, and kind of that made me think of it was, if you're not doing it on purpose, then you're doing it on accident. You know what I mean? So it's important to be everything you're doing it with a purpose as opposed to just kind of hoping things kind of fall into place and almost having kind of, I think I wrote down accident results. That's what it is. You know what I mean? So it's how doing things with a purpose. Um, I know we're at a time here. I
That's a
just
good
got
quote.
two. Oh, yeah, I'm pretty sure. I don't know if it was an article or a podcast of yours that I listened to, but I wrote it down. Two last questions here before we jump off. I know we're almost out of time here. Do you remember Mr. Timothy Dell from the cruise you went on in 2014?
Timothy Dell from a cruise that I went on in 2014.
He's a World War II vet, or World War II vet.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
What was the story behind that? I thought that was super interesting. I saw the photo you posted on your Instagram, so I was curious if there was like a reasoning behind that post.
Yeah, that's funny you asked that. It was Oh, you know what it was? It actually was not altruistic at all. It was when I was trying to boost my Instagram following. And at the time, I don't know if they even still do this, but at the time, Instagram would do these like weekly, um, uh, like contest type things, like a hashtag where they would challenge everybody to do a post that was similar to this thing and post pictures. And one of them was something about finding somebody that was inspirational or whatever. And so I just like ended up striking up a conversation with this guy on the cruise, and so that was super interesting. I was like, hey, let's take a picture together. And I was like, oh, this is perfect for this like Instagram challenge this week. And nothing ever happened with it, but it was still a cool guy to meet. I like meeting those, especially like World War II vets and people like that that are, that have fought in different wars and things. Like there's a lot of value to a lot of things that you can learn from people like that.
Mhm. No, absolutely. For my last question, I like to flip the script. So instead of me asking the question, it's you asking the question, but it's not to me. Pretend you have a crystal ball. You can ask this crystal ball any question. You'll get the 100% honest answer. What is one question you want to know the answer to?
Origin of the universe, probably. Um, I would just be really curious to hear what actually went down. You know, all we have is theories. Everything is a theory, and so I think I'd love to have a inside look at kind of more how we got here and why we exist. You know.
No, that's a good question. But I want to thank you so much for taking time to be on the podcast. I appreciate your time. There's so many more things. We didn't even really dive into podcasting as deep as I thought we were going to. But I appreciate your time. This was an awesome podcast. I want to give you the floor. Where can the people find you? Plug anything and everything you got right now.
Yeah, man. If you guys want to check out some of the stuff we got going on, just head over to travischappell.com. There's pretty much everything I do is over there. And then Guestio is our software company, our mobile app. And so if you are a podcaster, you're looking for guests, or you're a guest looking for shows to go on, then head over to guestio.com to fill out an account and start booking some high level people, right now today. So I appreciate you guys for tuning in.
Awesome. Make sure everything's linked in the show notes down below so everyone can find it. I want to thank you once again for taking time to be on the podcast. And I want to thank everybody for listening, whether you listen the entire way through or you only listen to bits and pieces. I really appreciate you taking time to check this out. Everyone, do me a big favor. Go and follow Travis. Go and subscribe to his podcast. Check out Guestio. Like I said, I'll make sure everything's linked in the show notes down below so you can find it. If you'd like to follow me, you can find me everywhere on social media at the Jacob Kelly. Feel free to come and say hello. My DMs are always open. As always, today's podcast is powered by True Fan. Thank you once again for listening, everybody. We'll talk soon.